Have you ever wondered why the oldest civilizations always looked to the skies, why they carved beings from above into stone, why their gods spoke in thunder, and their monuments defy the wear of time and logic? It feels as though something was taken, not just knowledge, but a primal memory buried, rewritten, or perhaps never told the way it truly was. You're listening to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. They say that absence creates mystery. But what if the absence itself was constructed deliberately with careful hands by those who feared what truth might awaken? What if silence was not a forgetting, but a burial? Across the ancient floodplains of Mesopotamia, in the cradle where history first took root, something older than memory lingers. Carved in the brittle bones of clay tablets, nestled deep beneath the ruined ziggurats of Uruk and Eridu, the name survives: Anunnaki. It hums low like a resonance just outside human hearing. Not gods, not quite men, something in between, something before. The tablets do not speak in parables alone. They speak of descent, of rule, of laws handed down from above, not metaphorically but quite literally. The Anunnaki came from the sky. They taught kings. They shaped languages and then they vanished. Yet their echo remained. Civilizations with no contact, no shared tongues drew the same motifs. Bearded figures in horned helmets descending from starships. Winged beings holding pine cones and mysterious bags. Serpents of knowledge and forbidden trees. Were these dreams or memories? The ziggurat rose not to reach the gods, but to meet them. Tier by tier, stair by stair, built as a landing place, a resting point between heaven and earth. And though erosion has worn their bricks, the design endures, echoed in the temples of Mesoamerica, the pyramids of Egypt, the mandalas of Tibet, a pattern copied across time. In 1849, archaeologist Austin Henry Leard brushed the sand away from the library of Ashurbanipal. Tens of thousands of tablets whispered to him in dead tongues. Among them, the Enuma Elish, the Sumerian king's list, and a creation myth far removed from Genesis. Humanity, they said, was crafted, shaped from clay and the blood of a god, not as children, but as laborers. We were not the culmination of love, but the result of utility. Somewhere between truth and myth, this idea slept until 1976, when Zecharia Sitchin cracked open the clay again, not to read the words but to hear the tone beneath. His claim was radical, that the Anunnaki came not from heaven but from Nibiru, a yet unseen 12th planet in our solar system, that they altered early hominids, perhaps even Homo erectus, to form a thinking, obedient species, Homo sapiens. Mainstream voices scoffed. He was labeled fringe, pseudoscientific, speculative. But Sitchin was not creating fantasy. He was asking a question: how did the Sumerians possess astronomical knowledge impossible for their time? Why did their star charts include planets we hadn't officially discovered? Why did their calendar use a base 60 system still reflected in our clocks today? Why does their math, their cosmology, their architecture still baffle us? A civilization that emerged seemingly from nowhere, fully formed with legal codes, irrigation, geometry, metallurgy, and star maps, and with it, stories of beings who brought it all across the ocean. The Mayans told of Kukulan, the feathered serpent, descending in a beam of light. In India, the Vadas describe Vimanas, flying chariots piloted by godlike beings. The Doon people of Mali speak of the Nommo, amphibious visitors from Sirius B, an invisible star they somehow knew existed centuries before modern astronomy caught up. So many fragments scattered like puzzle pieces, and always the same suggestion: a visitation, a catalyst, a forgotten inheritance. If the Anunnaki existed not as myth but as memory, then perhaps we are the orphans of a story we were never meant to finish. And still, there are forces that resist remembering. Reports whisper of anomalous artifacts sealed away, giant skeletons dismissed, gold-covered tablets confiscated and never shown again. The Vatican Library, the basement of the Louvre, the unreachable vaults of private collectors? What is hidden and why? History, we are taught, is a chain, cause and effect. But the oldest links are rusted. Some are missing entirely. And when we try to mend the chain, it breaks further. So we stop asking, we call it myth, we forget. But in the forgetting, something stirs. Perhaps it is not the Anunnaki we seek, but the part of us that remembers them. A genetic echo, a soul imprint, a riddle baked into our bones. And if one listens just beyond the hum of sleep, perhaps their names still speak. Perhaps they never left at all. If those who shaped us came from the stars, then what did they leave behind? And more haunting still, what did they take with them? It begins with a hole, not in the earth, but in the record. A silence too deliberate, too consistent across time to be mere erosion. Whole centuries missing. Civilizations that bloomed and vanished as if plucked from the timeline. And names that appear once, then disappear like a breath on glass. Take the city of Eridu, for instance, once hailed by Sumerians as the first city, the dwelling place of the god Enki. Its layers run deep like the folds of a forgotten dream. Archaeologists uncovered temples built at top temples, 19 of them, each older than the one above, as if something sacred kept pulling pilgrims back even after time had moved on. Enki, the keeper of knowledge, the lord of the sweet waters, a being often depicted with streams pouring from his shoulders, feeding rivers, nourishing life. But was he merely a deity? Or was the story a metaphor for something more, something that came from beyond bearing not water but information? Symbols often hide truths too sharp for plain words. The caduceus, two serpents entwined around a staff, was said to be a sign of healing, of Hermes, of Thoth. But when seen through another lens, it resembles the double helix DNA, wrapped and mirrored. Did our ancestors glimpse what we would only later discover? Carl Schorn once cautioned, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But what if the evidence was never truly absent, only ignored? In 1994, the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey shifted timelines. A temple complex over 11,000 years old, predating Stonehenge by millennia. Its pillars carved with strange animals, its stones arranged in deliberate alignments. Who built it? And why was it buried intentionally under tons of earth? As if someone wanted it hidden until we were ready to ask better questions. Many of the carvings, foxes, vultures, lions, bear uncanny resemblance to constellations. Some researchers believe its builders encoded astronomical knowledge with frightening precision. But this begs the question, where did they learn it? In the heart of the site, one pillar shows a humanoid figure, head lifted, arms turned outward. Not quite human, not quite beast, something other, watching, waiting. Perhaps we've seen that posture before in Sumer, in Egypt, in the petroglyphs of Australia. The same stance, the same silent gaze. Was there once a single source, a first teacher? Mainstream archaeology clings to gradual evolution, slow accumulation of skill, tool, and thought. But history is filled with leaps, not gentle steps, but vertical ascents, sudden bursts of genius, as though someone lit a fire in the dark. The invention of writing, the construction of megaliths, the leap from myth to mathematics, each came not in predictable waves, but as lightning in a still sky. Why? There are those who suggest intervention, contact, a transmission from a higher mind, and others who insist we imagined it all. But the question remains, why do we all imagine the same things? The Hopi speak of the ant people who sheltered them underground during times of global catastrophe. The Zulu tell of sky beings who came in fire and thunder. The Norse sang of gods descending on rainbows, wielding tools beyond comprehension. Stories echo, patterns repeat. And always, when mankind rises too fast, a fall follows. A flood, a war, forgetting, as if there's a threshold we are not allowed to cross. In 1909, a report in the Arizona Gazette described a discovery in the Grand Canyon, an underground city filled with Egyptian-like artifacts and strange tablets. The Smithsonian, when asked, denied all involvement. No follow-up, no photographs, just silence. Even now, search engines bury certain results. Algorithms favor consensus not because of conspiracy, but because of fear. Fear of chaos. Fear of losing the story we've agreed to tell ourselves. But what if the older story, fragmented and wild, holds a different kind of order? An order not of control, but of memory. So we dig not just into earth, but into myth, into symbols, into the quiet margins of ancient texts. And in doing so, we begin to see the outline of something vast, not finished, not clear, but present, and always beneath it, the same pulse. What if we are not the beginning? What if we are a continuation? What if everything we build is an echo? What if every cathedral is a replica? Every chant a translation, every law a shadow of something older, not lost but hidden. If the Anunnaki were the bringers of knowledge, what were they protecting it from? Or who? They say the truth sleeps beneath layers of stone, of dust, of language. But what if those layers were not natural? What if forgetting was engineered? Look closely at the myths that survived. Each tells of a golden age when gods walked among men, when knowledge flowed like water, when balance was kept, and then suddenly, always it ends. A rupture, a fall, a punishment. The Greek Prometheus gave fire to man and was chained. The Mesopotamian Enki warned humans of a flood and was silenced. In every tale, those who brought knowledge also brought defiance and suffered for it. What was so dangerous about enlightenment? Perhaps it's not just what was given, but what was remembered. Memory itself can be subversive. It rewrites what power tries to fix. And memory once sparked spreads like flame. The Anunnaki are remembered not in monuments alone, but in fragments of rituals, in the rhythms of ancient languages, in the geometry of forgotten temples. Their signature is not a name, but a presence, a pattern. Consider the strange case of the Baghdad battery. Ceramic jars found near Baghdad in the 1932nd, believed by some to be ancient galvanic cells. While mainstream archaeologists offer cautious explanations, others ask the forbidden question, what if electricity was not discovered but rediscovered? What else have we buried because it arrived too early? Puma Punku in Bolivia, where stones were cut with such precision, modern tools would struggle to replicate them. Massive blocks of andesite with interlocking grooves, sharp corners, drilled holes. No known culture at the time is credited with that level of engineering. So the site is labeled a mystery, an anomaly. But anomalies, when they accumulate, form a pattern, and that pattern points toward a question. Were we alone in shaping our past? The Anunnaki, in many interpretations, did not merely visit. They governed, they taught, they interfered. And then they disappeared without war, without collapse, as though withdrawing on purpose or being erased. Yet their story refused to vanish. In ancient Iran, the Ahura Mazda descends from the heavens in a winged disc to guide kings. In Egypt, Th, gifts, writing, and reckoning. In the papal woo of the Maya, the gods attempt to make man again and again until they get it right. Always there is the motif of the teacher, the failed creation, the adjustment. Modern geneticists marvel at the sudden leap between early hominids and Homo sapiens. A brain that tripled in volume, a larynx that dropped for speech, hands that refined tools with artistry. Evolution, yes, but with a pace that startles. Could such leaps suggest tampering? In 2003, scientists completed the Human Genome Project. Amid the data, they found genes with no clear evolutionary lineage. Junk DNA, they called it non-coding redundant, but even junk has architecture. What if it's not trash, but a message? Some researchers like Dr. Maxim Makukov of the Fezanov Astrophysical Institute proposed an idea called biological SETI. The notion that an intelligent signal could be embedded within our DNA if we were seated, altered, designed, wouldn't the code carry a fingerprint? But these are questions that fracture comfort. They imply ownership. They unravel certainty. So they are dismissed, ridiculed, shelved. Still, the symbols remain. In almost every ancient culture, serpents guard knowledge. In the Garden of Eden, it is the serpent who offers awakening. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent brings the calendar, the sky, the tongue. In India, Kundalini energy coils like a snake at the base of the spine, waiting to rise. Why do all these serpents whisper the same secret? Maybe it's because memory isn't linear. It coils, it returns, and if so, what if we're nearing a return? Ancient astronaut theorists point to alignments. How sacred sites across continents fall along specific planetary grids. They speak of energetic networks of places chosen not by accident but by design. Could the Anunnaki have mapped the Earth to fit their purposes? A network of nodes, temples, observatories, not religious in nature but functional. In Malta, the hypogee of Hal Saflieni contains a chamber where sound resonates at 110 Hz, affecting brain function, inducing altered states. Why would prehistoric builders engineer acoustic architecture unless they knew what sound could do? And who were they building it for? It seems the more we dig, the less we understand. Or perhaps the more we remember. There is an ache in the bones of ancient places, a kind of yearning, as if stones themselves are waiting for us to ask the right question. Not what happened, but why were we told it didn't? And that question, whispered softly in the spaces between facts, leads here back to the Anunnaki. Not as myth, not as saviors, but as a riddle woven through time. If they truly touch the roots of our origin, then we are not merely their descendants, we are their memory. There are moments in history that feel like echoes, recurring, rhythmic, uncanny, not repetitions in fact, but inform cycles that spiral rather than circle, returning not to the same place, but to the same question. What is hidden beneath the foundations of our certainty? Consider the story of Nineveh, once thought to be myth, a city described in scripture but dismissed by historians until it was found. Its ruins unearthed, its libraries intact, thousands of tablets inscribed with ununiform. Among them, stories of gods from the sky, kings who ruled for thousands of years, and maps of stars unknown to modern astronomers of the time. We were wrong about Nineveh. What else have we misjudged? The Sambrian king list is another relic that refuses to conform. It lists rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years before the flood. Mainstream scholars read these durations as symbolic, but symbols are not random. Why such precise numbers? Why repeat a pattern of divine reigns followed by a flood and then mortal kings? If we strip away our bias, the text tells a clear story. A time before time when beings unlike us ruled openly. It is tempting to discard such tales as myth, as exaggeration. But perhaps myth is simply memory wearing the mask of metaphor, distorted by time, but rooted in something real. The Epic of Gilgamesh, carved in clay long before Homer dreamed of Troy, tells of the hero's quest for immortality. In it, Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim, survivor of the Great Flood, granted eternal life by the gods. But those gods are not distant. They walk, they argue, they interfere, they are present. What kind of gods can die in battle, argue in councils, and descend in chariots of fire? If these were not metaphors but misunderstood technologies, beings advance, not divine, then history begins to tilt. We return to the flood again and again. In Mesopotamia, it's the deluge. In India, Manu builds a boat worn by the fish god Matsya. In the Americas, the Hopi and Inca tell of waters that swallowed cities. In Scandinavia, the gods prepare for Ragnarok, a cycle of destruction and rebirth. Water as eraser, water as reset, water as veil. But what if the flood was more than punishment? What if it was cleanup, an event to wipe the slate, not of sin, but of memory? When archaeologists speak of the younger Dryas impact hypothesis, they propose a sudden cooling period around 12,800 years ago, likely triggered by a comet impact. With it came floods, fires, and extinction. It marked the end of the Ice Age. But perhaps it marked something more, a closure, a deliberate reset point. The Anunnaki disappear from the records soon after. Yet in fragmented myths, they remain beneath names, behind masks. In Egyptian lore, Osiris is dismembered and scattered, his body hidden in pieces across the Nile. Isis reassembles him, not to restore, but to birth something new. Horus, the child of death and memory, reconstruction, resurrection, rebirth through fragmentation. Perhaps our history is Osiris cut apart, buried, waiting for us to find the limbs. Look at the Dune of Mali. For centuries, they spoke of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, orbiting Sirius A. They knew its density, its orbit, its duality. Western science confirmed its existence only in the 20th century. Where did the Dune learn this? Their oral traditions speak of Nomo, amphibious beings who came from Sirius and imparted knowledge before returning to the sky. The story is eerily detailed, disturbingly precise. Was this just coincidence? Coincidences accumulate like sediment. Eventually they become strata, layers of implication too thick to ignore. Why do these cultures, isolated by geography and time, share the same motifs? Sky visitors, hidden knowledge, sacred geometry, serpent symbols, floods and restarts. Why do their gods carry the same postures, wield similar tools, speak of stars we shouldn't have known? The answer might not lie in archaeology, but in pattern recognition. In the ability to trace threads that were meant to be unspooled. In South America, Nazca lines stretch across desert plains, massive geoglyphs only visible from the air. Were they messages, markers, landing guides? In Cambodia, Angkor Wat's central tower mirrors the peak of Mount Meo, the cosmic axis in Hindu cosmology. The temple aligns with solstices, its dimensions corresponding to kundrakal cycles. Was it built to honor the gods or to communicate with them? Ancient structures do not whisper. They resonate, and the frequency grows louder with each uncovered anomaly. Even in our dreams, we return to the stars. Children draw rockets, sing songs of the moon, invent gods with helmets and fire. What if our imagination is a kind of inheritance, a latent memory too deep to verbalize, too strange to forget? Modern science explores panspermia, the hypothesis that life's building blocks arrived on Earth via comet or meteorite. But what if it wasn't just life but language? What if symbols themselves were seated? The spiral, the cross, the triangle, shapes that emerge in art, in math, in myth, appearing before writing and persisting beyond it. Were these shapes chosen by chance, or were they the alphabet of another mind? Some physicists argue that reality is mathematical, that the universe behaves as a code. And if code governs everything, then perhaps our earliest myths were debug logs, records of interactions with the programmers. This is not to say the Anunnaki were gods, nor that we are their slaves. But if they existed, if they touched our world, then we are not the first intelligence on this planet. We are a continuation, a variation, a legacy cloaked in flesh and doubt. And if that legacy was hidden, then maybe it's because we weren't ready. But now the memories are surfacing. Not in temples, not in texts, but in us. Somewhere between silence and story lies a fracture, a crack through which forgotten things sometimes whisper. Not loudly, not urgently, but like a pulse, steady, patient, waiting. The more we excavate the past, the more it stares back with eyes too old to name. In stone, in bone, in myths repeated across continents, it does not scream, it lingers. The presence of something that once was and might still be. Consider Tiwanaku, high in the Bolivian Andes. Its précision défie explanation. Stones weighing hundreds of tons are fitted so tightly that not even a blade can slip between them. The techniques, the tools vanished. No inscriptions, no origin story, just forms that hint at knowledge long since severed from its roots. What kind of mind saw the world in such angles? Mainstream accounts attribute Tiwanaku's creation to pre-Incan cultures, but the stones themselves suggest another layer. Some are magnetized, others resonate when struck. Acoustics, polarity, geometry, all pointing toward a kind of science cloaked in ritual. It is not the presence of technology that startles, it's the absence of transition. There is no evolution, no slow development, just sudden perfection. As if someone gave a blueprint to a people not meant to keep it. And perhaps that is the signature of the Anunnaki, a knowledge that appears fully formed, then disappears before explanation can catch up. Not just in architecture, in the stars too. Ancient Babylonian star charts reveal awareness of planetary retrograde motion. Lunar eclipses predicted with accuracy that should have taken centuries of observation. And yet, it's simply there, recorded, utilized, then passed on. The Moapen tablets cataloging celestial movements are among the oldest astronomical texts we possess, but their origin is obscure. Were they inherited, transcribed, or dictated? In 1901, the Antither mechanism was pulled from a Greek shipwreck, a complex device of bronze gears used to calculate astronomical positions over 2,000 years old. Technology that rivaled 18th century clocks, appearing in a time it did not belong. So we're left with riddles. Advanced knowledge in primitive settings, fragmented, incomplete, and always misaligned with the timeline we've built. Why? Perhaps the keepers of that knowledge did not vanish. Perhaps they stepped back, withdrew behind the veil of story, behind symbols and masks like Viracha, the bearded god of the Andes, who walked among men, teaching them arts and astronomy, or Ketal Kavatal, who promised to return, or Owan, who rose from the Persian Gulf, half man, half fish, bearing writing, math, and agriculture. They arrive, they instruct, they leave, but none of them die. Legends never end, they pause. And in the pause, something sleeps. In the temples of Abydos, among the reliefs of Seti Diorn are shapes resembling helicopters, submarines, aircraft. Some claim erosion, others say coincidence. But coincidence has a pattern and repetition lends it gravity. The deeper question isn't whether these images prove ancient flight. It's why our minds keep circling the same images, the same skybound machines, the same divine engineers. Are we remembering or inventing? In the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, archaeologists discovered a layer of vitrified stone, sand fused into glass, a heat beyond anything expected. No volcano, no lightning, just a blast and silence. Skeletal remains show signs of sudden death, no wounds, no escape. Could there have been a war, a strike, a cleansing? The Mahabharata speaks of weapons that made the sun rise in 100 places, of chariots that flew on beams of light, of cities that vanished in fire. Poetry or record? When did we decide myth must always mean fiction? The word mythos once meant sacred account, a truth too deep for prose. But language shifted, and with it, reverence faded. Myth became make-believe and belief became heresy, yet still the symbols return. The all-seeing eye, the winged disc, the serpent coiled in 8. Why do they persist? In ancient China, the yellow emperor was said to ride a dragon chariot to the stars. In Japan, the Shinto kami descend on beams of light. In the Pacific, sky canoes carry ancestors to and from the firmament. Always the sky, always the ascent and return. It is as if we are being reminded of something we were meant to forget. In the Book of Enoch, once excluded from biblical canon, Enoch is taken by watchers who reveal the workings of heaven. They show him the stars, the calendars, the sacred geometry of creation. And then he vanishes. Enoch doesn't die. He's transformed, removed from earth. Perhaps the earliest abductee, but that word abduction carries fear. What if it was invitation? What if contact was never forced but chosen? Not everyone sees, not everyone hears, but those who do are changed. And so whispers remain. carvings on cliff walls, star maps carved into bone, harmonics built into stone chambers, breadcrumbs scattered across ages, left not for all, but for the few who still look up and remember. We were not meant to understand all at once. Initiation is gradual. Revelation is earned. And the Anunnaki, perhaps they never asked for worship, only remembrance. Maybe they walked among us, not as gods, but as reminders of what we might become again. And maybe the reason they left is because we stopped listening. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world feels suspended between breath and memory, a question lingers: have we been here before? Not in body perhaps, but in mind, in echo, in something deeper than recollection. There are patterns in history too, intricate to be accidents. Civilizations rise not linearly but in bursts. Flashes of brilliance that leave behind stone, fire and silence, as if someone lit a match, watched it burn, then left us fumbling in the dark. Look at ancient Sumer. Agriculture, language, law, astronomy, all appearing together suddenly with no traceable origin, no primitive precursor, no series of failed attempts, just emergence as if turned on like a switch and then just as swiftly decline. Where did the knowledge go? Some say it was lost to war, to flood, to time, but some losses are too precise, too clean, like a chalkboard wiped mid-formula. Could it have been taken? The idea that knowledge is cyclical, that humanity ascends and resets, is not new. Plato spoke of Atlantis, a civilization destroyed not by accident, but as consequence. He said the memory came from Egypt, who said it came from the stars. Always from the stars. Why do we tell the same story with different names? In the Dendera temple of Egypt, etched high on the ceiling, is the zodiac of Dendera, a sky map so accurate it aligns with precession, solstice, and equinox. How did they know the wobble of the Earth's axis? Something modern science confirmed only recently. The priest said it was given to them. By whom? In India's ancient Vedas, the gods ride machines called Vimanas, described with metal hulls, fire propulsion, and aerial battles. In one text, a pilot manuals a craft, navigating gravitational fields and referencing star charts. Scripture or manual? Again, we are told to read symbolically. But what if we've misunderstood reverence as imagination? Across the world, this reverence for the sky persists. The Hopi speak of blue star kakas. The Maui trace their lineages to the Pleiades. The Maya orient entire cities to Venus. Is it obsession or memory? Carl Jung once said that myth is the collective dream of humanity, but dreams arise from something, from stimulus, from scar, from whisper. What if these dreams are faint impressions of a contact long past, the residue of presence? There is an island in the Pacific, Nan Medal, built of basalt logs weighing tons, laid as if by unseen hands. No cranes, no wheels, no trees. The natives say it was made by gods who floated the stones into place. Even today, its origin baffles engineers. We keep finding structures that exceed the capabilities of their supposed builders. And instead of changing the story, we explain it away. We say they must have found a way. But what if they were never alone? There are petroglyphs in Australia of the one Genina. Beings with large eyes, no mouths and halos of light. They came from the clouds. They left laws. And then they disappeared. Their images are repainted every generation to keep them fresh, as if the land itself refuses to forget. In Utah's Sego Canyon, similar figures emerge. White faces, elongated skulls, radiating lines, no eyes, no expression, just presence watching. Different continents, same forms. Are we painting our gods or remembering their faces? The Anunnaki may not have left artifacts we can identify, but perhaps they left something harder to erase. Imprint in our DNA, in our dreams, in our desire to reach beyond. The Tower of Babel wasn't just a story of arrogance. It was a warning that humanity, unified and aspiring, threatened to touch something forbidden. The divine scattered them. Not for building, but for remembering too much. Language fragmented, memory scattered, but now, in the age of code and network, language reconnects. A new tower rises, not of stone, but signal. And what happens when we speak the same tongue again? Do we remember or do they return? The book of Genesis speaks of the Nephilim, giants, children of the sons of God and daughters of men, hybrid beings, watchers, guardians. In the book of Jubilees, these beings are punished not for violence, but for teaching forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, enchantment, astronomy. The crime wasn't corruption, it was illumination. There is a deep current in ancient lore. Knowledge is dangerous, not because of what it does, but because of what it reveals. What if the Anunnaki did not rule us, but unlocked us? What if we were not made, but modified? Some modern researchers speculate that the sudden leap in human cognitive function could correlate with epigenetic shifts, changes in how genes express themselves, triggered not by mutation, but influence. What if that influence was external? In 2004, a Harvard researcher posited that dream patterns contain shared symbolic frameworks across cultures, archetypes. He called them universal figures. But universality implies origin, and origin implies contact. If archetypes are inherited from where? The wise old man, the winged messenger, the shining traveler, the serpent teacher, always returning, always guiding, always other. It may be that the Anunnaki were not a race but a role, not beings of flesh but function, bringingers of memory, holders of threshold. And perhaps that role continues in the spaces between belief and reason, between silence and symbol. They linger, not to command, not to save, but to remind that we have always been more than we admit and less alone than we fear. There is a moment in the stillness between waking and sleep when the mind drifts into ancient waters. A current of symbols, fragments, shadows, not quite memories. It is there in that lineal tide that something stirs. Not a voice, but a presence. Not a fact, but a question. What if history as we know it is only the shallow layer? What lies beneath the textbook surface, below the carefully archived ruins, behind the silence of crumbled temples? The Anunnaki are not just relics of Sumerian mythology. Their name lingers in echoes, in bloodlines, in languages, in places where the earth has sealed its secrets too tightly. Even their absence is a kind of footprint. Modern scholarship views them as metaphors, archetypes, symbols of nature, order, and the stars. But symbols must be based on something. Archetypes emerge from contact. You don't imagine a visitor unless someone once knocked across Africa. Tales persist of sky people who brought fire. In Paullinia, ancestral gods came from the great canoe in the heavens. In northern Europe, the Asir descended through a rainbow bridge. And in every story, there is always one who stays behind, one who watches, one who waits. Who are they waiting for? Even our languages whisper fragments. In ancient Hebrew, Anak refers to giants, descendants of the Nephilim. In Mayan, Anak denotes a noble one. In Sumerian, A is sky and Kai is earth. Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens to the earth. Coincidence or code? In 1974, the Arecibo message was sent. A binary greeting from Earth to the stars. Encoded within it were elements of human biology, our solar system, and our mathematical language. But what if we weren't the first to send such a message? What if Earth was a receiver before it became a transmitter? There are carvings in Peru and Iran, stone discs in China, and artifacts buried beneath Siberian tundra, each etched with spirals, grids, and patterns not found in the surrounding culture. Many resemble circuitry, some suggest resonance, all point toward communication. Not written, not spoken, transmitted. We often think of contact in terms of ships, beings, and light in the sky. But what if it was subtler, a seeding of mind, a calibration of perception, a shift in the dream? The ancient Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was the seat of memory. That to remember was to awaken. Their rituals were designed not to worship, but to recall, to trigger something dormant. Was this mysticism or technology by another name? We forget that ritual once held information, movement, sound, breath, encoded instruction, repetition, not for control but for remembrance, initiation as reactivation. What were the mystery schools of Eleusis really teaching? Why did Pythagoras insist that the soul remembers that numbers are the bridge? Plato spoke of anamnesis, the idea that all knowledge is remembering, that truth is not learned but uncovered, and if truth is buried, who buried it? The Vatican archives stretch for miles. Not everything hidden is heretical. Some things are simply disruptive, too far from the narrative spine, too close to the forbidden shape of origin. Even within accepted texts, fragments remain. Enoch walked with the watchers. Ezekiel saw a wheel within a wheel, flashing with fire and crystal lifting from the earth. John spoke of angels descending with trumpets and stars falling to the ground. They were not, they were not speaking in metaphor. They were describing what could not be explained. The further back we go, the more advanced the knowledge seems. Ancient India's texts speak of atomic theory of matter composed of indivisible particles. Babylon knew of planetary retrogrades. Mesoamerican cortices tracked lunar and solar eclipses with staggering precision. Why does the curve of understanding slope backward? We explain it as intuition, as coincidence. But coincidence does not write calendars in stone. Coincidence does not measure the procession of equinoxes with megaliths. We are left with the uncomfortable possibility someone helped. And perhaps they did not simply come once. Perhaps they return cyclically. When alignments shift, when veils thin, when memory is ready. The Dunes say the Enemo will come again. When Sirius appears in a new form, the Hopi await the blue star Kina, the final sign. Christianity speaks of return. So does Islam. So does Hinduism. So did the Maya. Always return, but of what? The Anunnaki, if they were real, may not have been a race, but a pattern. An archetype of intervention. Not saviors, not tyrants, just reminders, agents of turning points. And perhaps we are approaching another. Technology accelerates, boundaries collapse, our machines grow minds, and our minds reach for machines. We map genomes, we edit life. We simulate consciousness. We pierce particles smaller than atoms and listen to waves older than stars. We begin to resemble the gods we once drew in clay. But we are missing one thing: memory. Not the memory of childhood or names or facts. The memory before memory. The one that lives in silence, in music, in dreams, in the longing to look up and understand why the stars feel familiar. Perhaps we do not need the Anunnaki to return. Perhaps they never left. Perhaps they've always been where we refuse to look. Time is not a straight line. It folds, it loops, it pauses in places where memory refuses to fade. And in those folds, in those soft bends of chronology, truths long buried still breathe. We mistake forgetting for progress. We believe we are the peak, the pinnacle of all that came before. But what if we are simply the latest echo? What if the future is merely a return? Consider the ancient city of Derenuyu in Turkey, a vast underground complex descending multiple levels into the earth, equipped with ventilation shafts, wells, and heavy stone doors that roll shut from the inside. It could shelter thousands. It had churches, schools, storage rooms. Who were they hiding from? Some say invaders, others suggest natural disaster. But the silence of its stone corridors hints at something older, something deeper. Why go beneath the earth unless the sky was no longer safe? In Cappadocia, interconnected tunnels sprawl beneath volcanic rock, labyrinths without written history. Built, abandoned, built again, a cycle of retreat, as though each wave of knowledge was chased underground, then buried beneath time. And above ground, across the world, the same story plays out. Teotihuacan in Mexico. Its name means the place where gods were born. Its pyramids mirror planetary orbits. Underneath the pyramid of the feathered serpent, liquid mercury was discovered, pulled in channels, glowing faintly like a forgotten circuit. Mercury was sacred to alchemists, a conduit, a mirror, a gate. Was it a tomb or a machine? Further east in Cambodia, Angkor Wat aligns with the constellation Draco. In Scotland, Callanish stones mark lunar cycles over 18.6 years. In Egypt, the Osirian at Abydos sits 30 foot beneath ground level. Its stone blocks eroded by water, though the desert has been dry for millennia. It's not just what was built, it's what time refuses to erase. Why do the oldest monuments seem the most advanced? We once assumed pyramids were tombs, but no pharaoh was found inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its internal structure resembles not a mausoleum but a resonance chamber. Stone cut to vibrate, angles tuned to frequency. What were they tuning into? Sound is memory, vibration is imprint. What if these structures were designed not to preserve bodies but signals? Many ancient traditions speak of music as divine language. In Hindu cosmology, the universe begins with a sound. In Genesis, creation begins with a voice. The Dune described the Nomo singing the world into form. Perhaps these were not metaphors. Perhaps creation is not a bang, but a tone. And perhaps those who came before knew how to hear it. The Anunnaki appear in Sumerian texts not only as rulers but as engineers. They measure, they assign, they divide land, time, even language. They do not preach, they organize. Could it be that their legacy is not myth but mathematics? The sexagesimal system base 60 used by Sumerians still structures our hours, our circles. Why 360 degrees in a circle? Why 60 minutes? These are echoes of someone else's logic, not adapted, inherited. We walk through life governed by systems we did not design, speaking words whose roots trail backward into ritual and rhythm. Why does the name Sin denote both the Sumerian moon god and a concept of moral wrong? Why do so many ancient deities bear names still lodged in the corners of our speech? Balara. Is it coincidence or residue? And if it's residue, what else lingers? The Nazca lines stretch across desert-like glyphs, awaiting translation. In Siberia, megalithic blocks form geometric patterns too massive for modern cranes. In Lake Titicaca, ruins rest 20 feet underwater, carved with precision, predating the rise of the Inca, who carved underwater before water came. And still, we returned to the sky. So many ancient myths speak of watchers, of those who came, observed, and withdrew. The book of Daniel names them. The Zohar describes their fall. The Quran mentions beings of smokeless fire who whispered to kings. They are always near power, near thresholds, near change. Were they sentinels, guides, or something else entirely? Some say the Anunnaki were divided. Some loved humanity. Others feared what we might become. Perhaps the stories of divine war, of banishment and rebellion are not moral fables, but memories of disagreement. What happens when creators disagree about the creation? Did one group uplift and another suppress? We find this duality in all our myths. The serpent in Eden who tempts the Promethean flame. The tower that rose too high. Wisdom and punishment intertwined. Knowledge, it seems, always comes at a cost. But the cost may not be danger. It may be remembering. Because to remember is to disrupt, to tear the veil of how it's always been. And in the tearing, something awakens. In dreams, people speak of languages they do not know, of symbols they've never studied, of cities that rise and vanish as if built from light. These are dismissed as fiction, but fiction often hides what waking cannot face. Carl Schorn wrote that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But what if the evidence is not external? What if the most extraordinary truth lives inside us? The Anunnaki may never return in ships. They may not stand upon pyramids or descend on pillars of flame. They may reappear in thought, in art, in the way a child instinctively stacks stones in a spiral, in the way we ache for stars we've never touched. And if they come again, it may not be to lead, but to witness, to see if this time we remember. There are questions that never leave. They change shape, migrate from mind to myth, resurface in new symbols, but they remain. They press at the edge of reason, quiet and patient, waiting to be asked again. Where did we come from? What was lost? Who were the first to walk the earth? And who watched them from above? The ancient stories whisper answers, but never directly. They curl around truth like mist, revealing only silhouettes. And the Anunnaki are among the oldest silhouettes we know. In the ruins of Nippur, once a sacred city of the Sumerian scribes etched into clay the names of the Anunnaki, gods who governed not just land and sky, but time, measurement, and law. They weren't abstract. They had tasks, ranks, disagreements. What kind of gods argue over quotas and calendars? We forget that our oldest deities were administrators, engineers, observers, not gods of thunder or love, but of order. Records show they came in the first days, brought knowledge, then vanished. No apocalypse, no farewell, just absence. And absence is sometimes the loudest sound. In cultures, oceans apart, beings with similar traits appear. The Akalu of Mesopotamia, sages, part fish and part man, rise from water to teach. The Sumerians describe them, so do the Babylonians. Their presence persists. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec left behind colossal heads with faces that do not resemble the local population. Their cities contain no gradual build-up, no learning curve, just sudden geometry, suddenly planned plazas, suddenly aligned temples, and then silence. The pattern repeats. High knowledge, abrupt disappearance. Why? Mainstream historians suggest climate, war, disease. But what if the collapse wasn't failure, but design? What if knowledge was meant to burn brightly, then retreat? The Library of Alexandria, once said to hold the totality of ancient learning, vanished in stages: fire, war, neglect. But perhaps those were only the surface reasons. Knowledge too dangerous to be controlled must be forgotten, not erased, hidden. And where better to hide than within story? The Anunnaki, some believe, encoded their knowledge in systems, mathematics, language, celestial alignments. Rather than speak plainly, they built labyrinths of meaning, not to confuse, but to filter. Only those who ask the right questions can follow the path. Initiation by curiosity. Even today, we stumble upon alignments too precise to be chance. The Great Pyramid's sides align almost perfectly with cardinal directions. Stonehenge marks solstices. Machu Picchu's Iniwatana stone casts no shadow at noon on the equinox. Why the obsession with light, shadow, timing? Because time is not neutral. Time is a gate. And those who understand its rhythm open it. Sumerian myths speak of cycles. Kingship descending from heaven, then withdrawn. Always a rhythm, always a pattern. Golden age, flood, rebuilding, awakening amnesia. Does this mean history is doomed to repeat, or that it's waiting for us to recognize the rhythm? The Anunnaki may be part of that rhythm. Not visitors, but variables, catalysts. They arrive when something stirs, when humanity begins to remember. In the book of Enoch, watchers descend and teach forbidden knowledge. Metallurgy, astrology, root science. The result, judgment, a flood, a scattering, a return to silence. What was forbidden was not the tools, but the autonomy they offered, because true knowledge frees and freedom resists hierarchy. Perhaps this is why contact, if it occurred, always breaks down. Not from failure, but from fear. There are those who say we are alone, that humanity is a fluke, a spark in the cosmic void. But loneliness is often a lens, and lenses distort. If we are truly alone, why do our dreams team with others? From children to sages, from artists to prophets, we are haunted by presence. Not always seen, not always kind, but undeniably there. The Anunnaki may not be names, they may be frequencies, memories that surface not in language but in instinct. The way we build, the way we look to the stars, the way we draw spirals when lost in thought, and maybe that's the most powerful legacy of all. Not control, not worship. Just a nudge to remember, to wonder, to rebuild the tower, not from stone, but from questions. Each question a step, each doubt a rung, each paradox a doorway, and at the top perhaps not gods, but mirrors. Memory is not passive. It waits, yes, but not quietly. It pulses, it aches, it moves beneath the surface of waking life like magma under stone. slow, hot, inevitable. Sometimes we call it deja vu, sometimes we call it intuition, but perhaps it is neither. Perhaps it is the past asking to be heard. Why do we recognize places we've never been? Why do some ruins feel like home? Why do ancient names stir emotions deeper than language? Perhaps because we've been here before, or because something inside us remembers what history has forgotten. The Anunnaki, if they were real, may not have lived in flesh as we understand it. Or perhaps they did, but only briefly, like light bending into matter, like gods putting on masks to walk among men, just long enough to plant, to teach, to warn, and then to vanish. Not out of cruelty, not to punish, but because the test had begun. In every ancient narrative, the divine does not stay. It visits, it intervenes, and then it leaves us alone with the gift of choice. Prometheus gave fire and suffered. Quetzalcoatl taught the calendar and was exiled. Enki saved humanity from the flood and was silenced. Those who give knowledge rarely remain. They are exiled by fear or by design. And perhaps the design was always this, to see what we would do in the silence. There is a beauty in that silence, a terrible freedom. We build, we forget, we rediscover. And in rediscovery, we sometimes find fingerprints, too large, too strange, too perfect. The ancient city of Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon holds stone platforms weighing over 1,000 tons. No modern crane can lift them. There is no clear explanation for how they were moved, carved, or fitted. We say unknown, but what we mean is unacknowledged. We hesitate to say impossible because that would mean admitting that someone once did the impossible or that we are not the first. And yet there are those who have always whispered that we are not mystics, shamans, poets, children, not scientists perhaps, but not liars. They speak of beings made of light, of songs that shape stone, of stars that speak in dreams. If these are fictions, they're strangely consistent. And if they are memories, then we must ask, what kind of world did we once know? In every mythos, the golden age ends not because of violence, but because of forgetting. The flood comes when memory fades, Babel falls when words divide, the kingdom is lost when the song is no longer sung, memory then is sacred. And forgetting the original fall, the Anunnaki may have known this. Perhaps their greatest gift was not technology, but the rhythm of remembering, the calendar, the stars, the ritual, the return. Because time too is a spiral, and all spirals return to their beginning. In Gobe Sipe, carved animals circle a central stone. Some say it's a sky map. Others say it's a calendar. But perhaps it is both. Perhaps it is a memory device, a way to encode the stars so that one day we might remember where we came from. Not just the earth beneath our feet, but the sky we fell from. Language carries these traces. In Latin, relia means to bind again, from which we get religion, not belief, but reconnection. To bind again with what? With memory, with source, with those who left their signatures in myth and stone. And yet we treat myth as illusion. We separate it from history as if the soul can be removed from the body and still leave something living. But myths breathe. They hold symbols older than empire, older than alphabet, symbols that awaken when spoken aloud. The spiral, the eye, the hand, the feathered serpent, the tree that touches heaven. We dismiss them as art, but perhaps they are keys. And perhaps we have forgotten how to turn them. What if remembering isn't an act of intellect, but of resonance? What if the moment you look at a ruined ziggurat and feel something in your chest tighten? That is memory. Not personal, not individual, but cellular, ancestral, cosmic. What if memory isn't something you hold? What if memory folds you? This may be what the Anunnaki knew. That memory must be hidden in layers, in symbols, in rituals, so that only the curious, the open, the patient could find it. Not for secrecy, but for readiness, because to remember is to awaken. And not all are ready, and so the gates remain sealed to some, but to others the gate is always ajar. It opens when you ask, what if? It opens when you wonder why a 1,000-ton stone is balanced without mortar. It opens when you see the stars and feel not awe, but recognition. It opens when you stop searching for gods in the sky and start listening for their echoes in your bones. Perhaps that is where they live now. Not in orbit, not in some distant galaxy, but in the silent spaces between thought, in the questions that won't let go, in the myths we cannot stop telling, and in the names that return like tides again and again: Anunnaki, Enlili, Inanna, names like tones, names like doors. And perhaps one day when we are quiet enough, they will open. The stars do not speak in words but in rhythm. They turn, they pulse, they echo across centuries. And if you listen not with ears but with stillness, you can hear them asking something old. Why do you not remember? This question hides in stone. It hides in silence. It hides in the curve of temples and the tilt of calendars. Every ancient site is not just a place. It's a question formed in architecture, a message encoded in shadow and light. And the oldest messages point upward, not just to the sky, but to what lies behind it. Why did so many ancient cultures map the heavens with such obsession? Not for farming alone, not for ritual. There was urgency in their alignments, precision that surpasses practicality. The temple of Haderor at Dendera holds a zodiac carved in stone with star positions so accurate it charts precession, the 26,000 year wobble of the Earth's axis. That kind of knowledge is not accidental. So where did it come from? We are told it came from patient observation from priest astronomers watching the sky for centuries. But some cycles are longer than civilizations. How do you measure what exceeds a lifespan? You inherit it. Someone gives you the sky already mapped. The Anunnaki were not described as prophets. They were described as teachers. And teachers pass on what is already known. The stars were their blackboard. In Sumer, each deity was associated with a celestial body. Enlil with the north wind and sky, Enki with water and wisdom, Inanna with Venus. Morning star and evening flame, they did not just name the stars, they woo them into law, cosmic law. As above, so below. This phrase echoed in Hermetic texts may be more than mystical poetry. It may be instruction, blueprint, a reminder that Earth was patterned on something higher, not metaphorically, but architecturally. Consider the layout of Giza mirroring Orion's belt or the temple of Kukulkan in Chichen. It's casting the serpent's shadow on equinox. These were not coincidences. They were echoes, repetitions of a forgotten geometry, a sacred symmetry. And symmetry is not for beauty alone. It is for communication, resonance, tuning. Perhaps the ancients were tuning their cities the way we tune instruments to catch a frequency, to amplify a signal. And who are they trying to reach, or who are they remembering? Memory in this sense is not just mental. It is spatial, monumental, built into earth and aligned with heaven. Memory as landscape. Even the myths follow this pattern. The epic of creation in Babylon, Enuma Elish, describes gods emerging from primordial chaos, dividing sky from earth, setting stars in motion, and creating man to serve. It is violent, grand, precise, but it is not original. It was adapted from older Sumerian sources, and those may have come from earlier still. How many times has the story been rewritten? And each time, a little more metaphor, a little more forgetfulness, until the gods became archetypes, until the stars became symbols, until the names lost their voices, and yet some voices never quite fade. Take the constellation Orion, revered in Egypt, in Africa, in Mesopotamia, associated with Osiris, with Nimrod, with hunters and kings. Why that shape? Why that name? We forget that Anu was the father of the Anunnaki. His seat, they said, was in the heavens, perhaps in Orion. Was this poetic or literal? Did the Anunnaki point us to the stars, not to worship, but to trace a path? In Aboriginal lore, Orion is not a hunter, but a canoe, a vessel, a means of journey. In Dune stories, it is the point of origin. Perhaps Orion is not just a constellation. Perhaps it's a memory map, a return code. In 1998, scientists discovered that human DNA shares specific geometric ratios with harmonic frequencies, music, essentially embedded in code. And some researchers began to ask, what if the genome is tuned? Tuned to what? To light, to vibration, to sound, and maybe to memory. Ancient temples like New Grange in Ireland or Hippojam in Malta resonate at specific frequencies when tones are chanted. Brainwaves shift, awareness changes, time softens. Were these sites not just sacred but sonic? Were they remembering machines? If memory is vibration and vibration is frequency, then sound becomes a key and myth becomes the pattern that holds the key. This is what the Anunnaki may have left. Not machines, not scrolls, but harmonics, shapes, alignments, a mnemonic web stretched across continents. But why? Why encode memory in stone? Because stone endures. Because words can be erased, but resonance echoes. And perhaps they knew this, that one day we would reach again, that we would rebuild Babel, not as a tower, but as a network, that we would seek what we forgot. And that when the pattern was seen again, something would stir, not in the sky, but in us. Not contact from without, but awakening from within. And so the question returns, did they exist? But why do we still remember them? They say when a bell rings in an empty room, the sound does not die. It lingers, it becomes the room. It reshapes the silence. Perhaps memory works the same way. Perhaps the presence of the Anunnaki isn't something to be uncovered, but something that never stopped vibrating. Not in monuments, not in myths, but in us. Why do certain patterns repeat, not just across space, but across time? Why do humans return to the same symbols, the same questions, even when separated by oceans and millennia? The Ouroboros, the pine cone, the feathered serpent, the winged disc. These are not artistic accidents. They are signs of memory surfacing. They are echoes of a shared origin, splintered and scattered like starlight through a prism. Perhaps the Anunnaki did not come to rule or even to teach, but to plant something, a resonance, a key, a pattern that would outlast stone and survive flood. Something that could be awakened, but only when the world was ready. Something like a song. In ancient myths, creation does not begin with form, but with sound. In the beginning was the Word, says the Gospel of John. In Vedic hymns, the universe is sung into being. In Egyptian lore, thus speaks the world into motion. Why always sound? Why always vibration? Because sound moves without needing light, because it travels in darkness. Perhaps the first contact was not visual. Perhaps it was tonal. And perhaps the temples we've uncovered are not just spaces of worship, but resonant bodies, instruments tuned to frequencies that could align thought with memory. The Great Pyramid of Giza vibrates at 432 Hz, a tone some call the natural frequency of the universe. That number appears again and again in ancient flutes, in the geometry of sacred sites, in the mathematics of planetary motion. Coincidence or a calibration? Some researchers believe the Anunnaki may have encoded information through harmonic ratios, not words, but intervals, like chords in a forgotten symphony. Played not with instruments, but with consciousness itself. Is it possible to remember through sound? Modern neuroscience tells us that memory is not stored in one place, but everywhere. In chemical traces, in electric pulses, in spatial configurations, and when triggered by scent, by sound, by dream, it returns suddenly, completely. Perhaps civilization itself is a dream we are slowly waking from. And the Anunnaki are not the dreamers, they are the alarm. Every few generations, the questions return. Not just in books, but in intuition, in architecture, in longing. Someone builds something that echoes something older. Someone sees a symbol that stirs something unspoken. We think we are discovering, but maybe we are remembering. There are legends of people who could see the shapes behind the world. Not visions, not hallucinations, but memories breaking through the veil. Mystics called it gnosis. Philosophers called it anamnesis. Today, we might call it pattern recognition. But what if the pattern is older than us? What if it was placed there? In Bolivia, the site of Pumapunku holds stones cut with such precision and complexity that modern engineers still debate their function. Some believe they were part of a modular construction system. Others say they were ceremonial. But what ceremony requires tolerances measured in microns? unless the ceremony was technological, unless the sacred was functional. This blend of science and spirit, of precision and myth, is what defines Anunnaki influence. It challenges the division we have placed between the measurable and the meaningful. To them, there may have been no division. In Sumerian texts, Enki is both god and engineer. Inanna is both goddess and weapon. The line between divine and device blurs. Perhaps the Anunnaki were not mystical at all. Perhaps they were practical, but when their practicality was remembered imperfectly, it became myth. And when myth is told long enough, it becomes sacred. So now we stand in cathedrals of forgotten geometry, looking for spirits and missing the structure. We chant names and forget functions. We pray where once we calculated and still something waits. In 2003, a team of physicists working on quantum resonance proposed that certain geometric structures like tetrahedrons and dodecahedrons could amplify consciousness. Not electricity, not sound, consciousness. What if the temples weren't built for gods but for minds? What if the Anunnaki built not machines but mirrors? Structures designed to reveal what was hidden, not in the heavens but in the human. We are so busy looking for proof. We ignore the permission, the quiet invitation buried in every myth. Remember, that's all it says. Not worship, not believe, just remember. Because remembering is the first step to becoming. And if the Anunnaki knew anything, perhaps it was this. The future can only be shaped by those who reclaim the past, not through conquest, but through quiet recognition. So the pyramids endure, the stars shift, the myths spiral, and you, listener, dreamer, wanderer, are part of it. Not outside the story, but woven into it. What you choose to remember changes what comes next. Sometimes memory doesn't speak, it hums. It waits in bone and blood and breath, surfacing in moments we cannot explain. A flicker of recognition in a dream, a chill at a ruin, a sense that a story is being told again and that we've heard it before. We are taught to forget, not directly, but through repetition of a different story, a simpler story, one that fits neatly into books and timelines, one that replaces questions with chronology. But the earth remembers, and the Anunnaki, they may be the punctuation marks in that deeper sentence. Everywhere we dig, we find knowledge out of time. Ancient batteries, carvings of aircraft, maps that show Antarctica without ice, tools with no fingerprints, cities beneath the sea. The pattern is not linear, it's recursive. Civilization does not rise and fall, it pulses. Each peak echoes an earlier one, higher, more visible, but never original, always a memory of something older. In ancient India, the Mahabharata describes wars between flying machines, vimanas, firing weapons brighter than 1,000 suns. It speaks of cities reduced to ash, of survivors fleeing underground. It is poetry, yes, but it is also engineering. Why describe flight with such detail, such metallic precision, if the idea had never existed? In Egypt, Dendora's temple reliefs show objects that resemble electric lamps. In Baghdad, clay jars coated with copper contain the right elements for primitive batteries. In Peru, elongated skulls suggest either ritual or biology that doesn't fit. Always something doesn't fit, we smooth it over. Call it symbolic, call it anomaly. But too many anomalies form a pattern, and patterns ask to be read. The Anunnaki are part of that pattern. In Mesopotamian myth, they do not just rule. They assign roles, calculate orbits, designate sacred numbers. They do not act like myths, they act like architects. And architecture is memory made solid. Consider the number 12. 12 gods, 12 months, 12 constellations. The Sumerians divided time by 60, not 10. Why? Because 60 is divisible in ways 10 never will be. It is elegant, it is deliberate, and perhaps it was inherited from minds who saw numbers not just as count but as current. Frequencies that shape matter, keys that unlock not doors but dimensions. In every sacred tradition, names have power, true names can summon, hidden names protect. Is this just myth? Or is it memory of a technology so old it became prayer? The Anunnaki's names still echo Enki, Enlil, Inanna, Ninhersug. But names are just the beginning. Behind them are functions, symbols, alignments. Inanna, goddess of love and war, descends into the underworld and returns transformed. A metaphor, perhaps, or a ritual or a memory of cycles older than religion. Resurrection, renewal, return. The same story told in different masks. Why does every culture speak of a time before a golden age, a fall, a flood? Because somewhere deep in the species, something broke or was broken. And the stories are how we stitch it back together. Perhaps the Anunnaki were not saviors, not tyrants, just witnesses, engineers of a project abandoned or paused or hidden until we asked the right way, not with telescopes, but with silence. The temples that remain, Angkor, Giza, Chavin, were not designed for noise. They reward stillness, echo sound in strange ways, carry whispers farther than they should, as if the stone is listening, as if it remembers. Perhaps the earth itself is encoded. Ley lines, magnetic anomalies, hidden symmetries between sites. What if the planet was tuned, a sphere of resonance, a body made to dream? And what if we are its dream? In the book of Genesis, the Nephilim are the sons of God who came to earth. In the book of Enoch, they fall for human beauty, teach forbidden arts, and are punished. But who were they really? Hybrids, teachers, failures? Perhaps they were what happens when memory moves too fast, when resonance skips ahead of readiness. Because knowledge is not neutral and neither is memory. Both change the one who holds them. We long to know the truth, but truth, like light, can blind as well as reveal. Perhaps that is why the Anunnaki left breadcrumbs, not blueprints. Perhaps they knew we must walk the spiral ourselves, not be told, but remember. And so they embedded their questions in stories, their coordinates in myth, their echoes in names we still speak, not knowing why they taste familiar. The real mystery is not whether they were here. It's why we cannot stop asking. Some truths do not hide, they wait. They wait beneath the hum of daily life, beneath the data and noise. Not because they are afraid, but because they are patient, ancient, and perhaps sacred. The Anunnaki, if they were ever here, did not leave in haste. They disappeared like the stars at dawn. Not vanished, just less visible. Pulled behind the light of something louder, something newer, something forgetful. But forgetting is never complete. Traces remain in language, in ruins, in the architecture of thought. We think we invent, but more often we retrieve. In 2001, scientists discovered that certain geometric patterns like the golden ratio appear not only in nature, but in the brain's electrical firing, in the way trees branch, in the structure of galaxies, in the rhythm of Beethoven, and in the layout of temples more than 5,000 years old. Why would early humans use sacred ratios in structures they claimed were dictated by the gods? Because those who taught them knew the Anunnaki, as written in Sumerian tablets, were not just visitors. They had ranks, duties, territories. They worked in pairs, they argued, they rebelled. These were not celestial metaphors, these were personalities. They had logic, flaws, power, and purpose. And when you strip the myth of wings and robes, what's left feels eerily human or perhaps post-human. Those who came before or beyond. There's a reason the stories linger, not because we cling to fantasy, but because something in us senses they were never fantasy at all. That myth is just memory with better lighting. Every few decades, someone rediscovers the Anunnaki. A new book, a new theory, a new excavation. But the story never fully arrives. It stays fractured like a mirror shattered across history. And maybe that's the point. Some things are not meant to be seen all at once because wholeness too soon can blind. So we gather fragments, a glyph in Ur, a carving in Levanta, a tablet from Nineveh, a dream from a child who's never read a single line of myth. Together they make something, not a picture, but a pulse. The Anunnaki may never return in a form we recognize. But what if they already returned, not as flesh, but as memory, a code embedded in us, not in DNA, but in awareness. In the yearning to build, to align, to ask impossible questions, to seek the stars, not for escape, but for remembering. Why else do we feel lonely in a universe we barely know? Why else do we dream of beings who do not speak but understand? Perhaps because we were taught that way. Long ago, before we had words, the builders of the first cities, Eridu Uruk, claimed their knowledge came from above. Kingship, they said, descended from heaven. The phrase is repeated, insistent, and yet we treat it as poetic. Why? When a thing is said once, it may be metaphor. When it is said by dozens of civilizations, perhaps it is memory. And if that memory holds, even faintly, then the Anunnaki were not only real, they were foundational. Not gods, not devils, but originators. Those who sparked the pattern and stepped back, perhaps to observe, perhaps to return, perhaps to wait until we remembered them, not with fear or worship, but with comprehension. Because comprehension is communion. Modern science now maps the cosmos with satellites and simulations. We build artificial minds, we simulate genomes, we reach for Mars. But all our progress follows a pattern that's somehow familiar. We discover, then destroy. We build, then forget. We ascend, then fall. Unless we learn to remember not just what we've done, but who we've been, that may be the gift the Anunnaki left. Not tools, but the hunger to remember. And perhaps if we follow that hunger far enough, we will reach them, not in the sky, but in the reflection. Not all awakenings happen in light. Some begin in darkness, in the hush before insight, in the breath before memory returns. That darkness isn't emptiness, it's density. It's the weight of what we haven't yet recalled. Perhaps that's where the Anunnaki still live. Not in the past, but in the pause. There's a kind of haunting that doesn't come from ghosts, but from possibility, from the things we almost remember, from the names that brush past the edge of language. Anu, Enki, Inanna. Not just names, tones, frequencies. Something carved into the collective nervous system of humanity. When you say them aloud, something stirs. And perhaps that was the point. In the temples of Sumer, each deity had a number, a planet, a sound. These were not arbitrary. They were part of a system, cosmic, acoustic, architectural, a language not of grammar but of geometry. Imagine a civilization where every structure, every word, every ritual was tuned, where resonance was not a metaphor but a principle of design. What would it mean to build a city that sang with the sky? This isn't fantasy, it's memory. Ancient texts describe ziggurats as born heaven stakens that connected earth and sky, not just spiritually, but functionally. Platforms from which communication was possible, perhaps not through sound waves, perhaps through something subtler, quantum harmonic dimensional. If that sounds like science fiction, it may be because we've mistaken ancient science for modern myth. And it may explain why so many ancient ruins feel like puzzles. Because they were never meant to be observed. They were meant to be activated. What if the Anunnaki didn't just build structures but systems of knowing, of seeing, of becoming? In nearly every culture, the myth of the gods ends the same way. They leave not in defeat, not in death, but in withdrawal. A deliberate silence, a step back so that something could unfold us. But what if their leaving wasn't distance? What if it was depth? What if they moved inward, not upward, into symbols, into cycles, into blood? What if the Anunnaki are not gone but encoded in our instincts, our fears, our dreams, the desire to return to something we cannot name? That longing is real. It drives religion, science, art, exploration. Every satellite we launch, every cave we paint, every myth we whisper in the dark, it all points to the same center, a home we don't remember losing. And in that loss, there is a pattern. First comes the gift, then comes the forgetting, then comes the search, and we are in the search. That's why the myths still matter. Not because they are factual, but because they are functional. They keep the trail warm. They remind us where the doors were. even if the doors are buried, even if the keys are hidden in numbers or dreams or ruins underwater, because forgetting too may have been part of the design, a test not of memory but of will. Will we seek? Will we question? Will we remember what we were told to forget? In ancient lore, the Watchers were not monsters. They were guardians of knowledge, of gateways, of balance. Their fall was not rebellion, it was compassion. They taught too much too soon. And so the flood, a reset, but you cannot unring a bell, you cannot untell a story. And so we remember not all at once, but in waves. A dream of flight, a vision of light, a structure aligned to a solstice, a question that won't leave. The Anunnaki may never appear in the sky again, because perhaps their greatest work was not what they built, but what they planted. It begins not with a fact, but with a feeling, not a theory, a vibration, a sense that something is waiting beneath the sand, beneath the skin, beneath the centuries of forgetting. It does not knock, it hums, and the hum is growing louder. Why do certain children dream of stars they cannot name? Why do some ancient symbols appear in places that never met? Civilizations that never touched, carving the same shapes into stone, telling stories of beings who came from the sky and gave fire, law, order, language. We are told they imagined it, but imagination has limits and coincidence has a tipping point. There's a reason the same questions rise again in every age. Who are we? Where did we come from? Why do the stars feel like home? The answers are never given, only echoed. And always there is the presence of something older. The Anunnaki are not the only name, they were many. Elohim, Nephilim, Davas, Apkallu, Viracha, the Shining Ones, the Watchers, the Architects. Names change, the pattern doesn't. The pattern says someone came, someone shaped, someone left and left behind us. But not only us, also the ruins, the myths, the impulses to build high, to dig deep, to remember. Why does every flood myth begin with warning? Why does every golden age end in silence? Because memory is dangerous when misunderstood, and yet it always returns. Perhaps this is the real legacy of the Anunnaki. Not technology, but recursion. The spiral of knowing, the echo of the question, a design that ensures forgetting can only go so far before the shape of the story re-emerges. And here we are again with our machines, our probes, our data, and still we dream of gods with strange eyes, of voices in the sky, of gates between worlds. Perhaps because gates are real, and perhaps they were never meant to open outward but inward, not for escape, for encounter with the part of us that remembers what it was to be shaped by stars, to be spoken into being by hands that glowed, to walk in temples that hummed with frequency, not worship, to feel the bones of the earth vibrate with names no longer taught but not forgotten, only buried. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there is a cedar forest guarded by beings not of this world. The path is forbidden, the knowledge guarded. Gilgamesh seeks it anyway, and for this he is changed. That is not fiction, that is instruction. There are always guardians of the threshold. Always gates that require something more than curiosity, something closer to sacrifice. To see beyond the veil requires losing what blinds us to it. And what blinds us is certainty. The Anunnaki do not demand belief, they demand attention, discernment, stillness. They are not gods in the sky. They are the silence between thoughts. They are the memory beneath the metaphor. And in every era, we are given a choice. Turn away and forget, or step forward and remember. But remembrance is not safe. It unravels what we thought we knew. It demands we question what we call history. It opens the possibility that we are not the first and not alone. It asks, what if you are the echo of something older? What if your longing is not madness, but signal? What if the stars are not far, but familiar? Some truths are not meant to be proven, only lived. And maybe that's what this journey is. A remembering so slow, it feels like discovery. A descent so deep, it feels like ascent. And at the center, not answers, but invitation. To feel again what it meant to be in tune. To awaken not to knowledge but to resonance. Memory returns in strange ways. It doesn't always come with certainty. Sometimes it comes as a breath caught in the throat. Sometimes as deja vu, sometimes as the feeling that you've stood here before in this body or in another, that the air itself is watching, listening. Ancient sites do not echo with sound. They echo with recognition. Step among the stones of Gobekli and something leans close. The Tiyas are older than writing, older than cities, older than myth, and yet they speak not in language, in geometry, in placement, in alignment with stars that no longer rise where they once did. Who built this? We are told hunter-gatherers. But hunter-gatherers do not build observatories aligned to the procession of equinoxes. They do not carve cosmic maps in limestone unless they remembered something or someone reminded them. Perhaps the Anunnaki did not appear in one moment, but reappear in waves, guiding, nudging, rekindling a flame humanity had been forced to forget. And maybe some remembered more than others. Shamans, priests, madmen, poets, those who lived close to dream, those who could hear what cities drowned out. Not all temples are built with stone. Some are built in the folds of the mind, in the silence between stories, and it is there that contact happens. A vision, a name, a number, not proof but invitation. The myths say the gods walked among us once, then they withdrew. But they left behind a way, a path encoded in architecture, in sound, in sky. Some believe the great megaliths of the world are part of a map, a geodetic grid, a planetary circuit once activated by vibration, by intention. Why build in impossible places? Why align with solstices? Why use stones that hum? Because they weren't building for shelter. They were building for resonance. Temples were not homes, they were instruments tuned to a forgotten scale. And in the right frequency, in the right moment, maybe something answered, maybe something still does. Some researchers claim certain ancient chambers amplify alpha and theta brain waves, the same frequencies found in deep meditation and trance. These states, long considered spiritual, are also neurological doorways. Places where language bends, where time folds, where the inner and outer blur. Is that where they waited? The Anunnaki? Not in ships, but in silence. In the place the waking mind avoids, the mind isn't the only structure capable of memory. Water remembers, stone remembers, light bends to will. What if memory itself is elemental? And the myths, our oldest, are not fiction but residue. Every culture has stories of beings who came from the sky, not just as gods, but as bringers of knowledge, of destruction, of change. And always they leave or are banished or simply fade. But the stories remain. The feathered serpent, the luminous teacher, the builder of cities in a single night, and buried beneath the metaphors, details that don't belong in fairy tales, astronomical numbers, geological clues, instructions. It's not the science we lack. It's the ability to listen differently, to accept that what we call myth may hold data, compressed, transmitted through generations, waiting for a species that has forgotten to learn again how to remember. Maybe that's the cycle. They come, we rise, we forget, we seek, they return. Or maybe they never left. Just change frequency, and all we must do is tune ourselves accordingly. Some knowledge doesn't reveal itself in answers, but in proximity, in quiet, in alignment. As if truth isn't a matter of discovery, but resonance. Stand in the heart of an ancient site, Machu Picchu, Chichen Itza, Baalbek, and something shifts. The air thickens. The body remembers. It's not just awe, it's recognition. The stones aren't just heavy, they're tuned. We forget that our ancestors didn't think of spirit and matter as opposites. They thought of them as frequencies, degrees of the same vibration. This is why temples were aligned to stars, why mantras were etched into walls, why names were sacred, because they understood that names weren't labels, they were keys. And the Anunnaki, they gave names to things before we even knew to ask. Enki, Ninhurag, UTU. Names not of deities, but of principles, of forces, of functions, of balance. In one tablet, Enki shapes humanity not as a master, but as a collaborator, not to serve, but to steward. And then he steps back. Why? Because maybe the greatest gift is not presence, but permission. Permission to remember, to rebuild, to re-encode what was once embedded in the stars into something living into us. And maybe the forgetting was never a punishment. Maybe it was a pause so that when we remembered, it would be ours, not borrowed, not inherited, but earned. That's why memory returns slowly through image, through symbol, through structure, not as information, but as invitation to align with what always was. The pyramids are not pointing up, they're pulling in, tuning forks in stone, anchored to stars, whispers of scale, precision, harmony. Even now, we don't fully understand them because they weren't built to be understood. They were built to be remembered. In the Papalv, the gods attempt to create humans from mud, then from wood, then finally from maize. Each failure teaches something, each version closer to resonance. Perhaps we too are a version. Perhaps the Anunnaki did not create us whole, but seated a pattern, one that could grow toward them or beyond them. And if we are growing, then what is the light we move toward? It isn't technological. It isn't even spiritual. It's harmonic. The Anunnaki were not worshipped because they demanded it, but because they vibrated at a frequency that made reality bend. And in rare moments, some humans have touched that frequency. Mystics, prophets, artists, scientists, the ones who dream of structure, the ones who see beauty in the math, the ones who whisper, not shout. Because the loudest truths are often the most fragile, and still they survive, encoded in megaliths, in myth, in the way we still look up at the sky. Not in fear, but in longing. The return we await may not be theirs. It may be ours. A return to a state of tuning, a remembering not of fact but of form, to live in alignment, to create in resonance, to speak not to dominate but to harmonize. The Anunnaki, if they ever were, may not have wanted followers, they may have wanted mirrors. There's a moment just before sleep when the boundaries blur, the room softens, time falls, and thought becomes something else. Something closer to memory or maybe contact. Maybe that's where the Anunnaki have always waited. Not in the past, not in the sky, but in that lineal fold where dream meets recall. Because not all memory is backward. Some memory is forward. It pulls. It insists. It shows us what we were only so we might see what we still could be. Across traditions, initiates speak of thresholds, of voices in the dark, of luminous beings who teach then vanish. They call them angels, divas, spirits, ancestors. But the stories converge, the encounter, the message, the transformation. So what is that voice that comes when everything else is silent? What is that shape that watches just beyond vision? If it is the Anunnaki, then perhaps they were never a race, but a resonance, a state of mind, a state of being. One we once knew, one we keep forgetting. And still it returns through symbols, through longing, through the ancient question that will not sleep. Göbekli, the great ziggurat of Ur-Teotihuacan. These were not built for the eye. They were built for the mind, for alignment. Each site whispers the same intention, recalibration, not of society, of soul. You walk the corridors, you climb the stair. You feel the symmetry unfold inside you as if memory was architecture. As if memory could be built stone by stone into the earth itself. Maybe that's why they left us stone. Because it outlasts, because it vibrates, because it remembers. And in its memory, something stirs inside us. Have you noticed how the questions keep returning? Who were they? Why did they come? What did they want? And always the last question, when will they return? But maybe the answer was never about arrival. Maybe it was always about awakening. They won't return as beings. They will return as a chord struck across the species, as a moment when enough of us tune in, hear it, feel it, and become something else. Not worshippers, but witnesses of the pattern, of the cycle, of the harmonic truth beneath the noise of modernity. The ancients spoke of a time before time, when knowledge was pure and light was a language, when we were not divided from the stars but extensions of them. This was not metaphor, it was mapping. They weren't describing dreams, they were recalling states of consciousness, of connection. And the Anunnaki, they may have been the ones who remembered longest, who knew how to shape reality through resonance, not rule, who left not because they were done, but because we weren't ready until now. Now the ruins are speaking again. Now the myths sound familiar again. Now the sky feels close again, and maybe this time we listen. What if the silence isn't absence but invitation? We look to the stars and ask, who made us? But what if the stars were never the source, only the mirror? What if the makers left something not above us but within? The final stories of the Anunnaki don't end with conquest. They end with retreat, not defeat, not death, just departure, a pause, a letting go. And in their place, myth, symbol, stone, sky. We call that absence mystery. But mystery is only the shape of something remembered imperfectly. There are those who say the Anunnaki will return, that they wait behind a veil, that the veil is thinning. But maybe the veil was never around them. Maybe it's around us, woven of certainty, pride, noise. What if remembering them means remembering ourselves? What if awakening doesn't come in light, but in stillness? The temples have not crumbled, they've only changed form. Now the temple is the question, now the gate is your breath, now the memory is you. Because remembering is not about data, it's not about proof, it's about pattern. It's about feeling the old hum vibrate again beneath your thoughts. It's about looking at an impossible carving and saying not how, but why. It's about noticing that every ancient silence still speaks. We are not waiting for visitors, we are becoming the ones we once waited for. The Anunnaki may have passed their knowledge forward, not in ships or codes, but in hunger, in that quiet ache to build, to align, to belong to something not smaller than ourselves, but larger. That ache is the invitation, and if we answer, we do not summon them, we join them. Not as servants, but as stewards, not as children, but as echoes, as harmonics, as the next note in a cosmic scale that's been playing since long before history had a name. The Anunnaki do not ask to be believed. They ask to be remembered, not for what they were, but for what they awakened. And now it's our turn to ask differently, to see differently, to walk through the ruins, not as tourists, but as listeners. The language is still there, carved into stone, etched in myth, resonating in breath, waiting, always waiting for the one who stops, the one who listens, the one who no longer asks to be told, but is ready to remember.